This is the Aftermarket Radio Network.
Welcome everyone to yet another episode of Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z. I'm Matt Fanslow, and the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you are uncool. That and other probing thoughts after a word from our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training. Let NAPA Autotech's Build-A-Tech program, like Build-A-Bear, help you turn your general technician into a moneymaker for your shop. Make them a profitable member of your team. Go to napaAutotech.com for more details. Yeah, it really just turns out I'm not joking about the probing topic. You got kind of a request to discuss probing, and I think specifically piercing. Probing meaning somehow gaining access to a circuit for testing with a meter, most likely more so with an oscilloscope, a test lamp, something of that nature, and piercing, what I thought of it. And the truth is I am in favor of it. Thank you all for listening, and yeah, I will talk to you guys next time. I'm just kidding. I'll keep going a little bit longer. But the heavy hitters accessing circuits is what? Back probing, teeing into the circuit, and then piercing. Maybe there's something else I'm not thinking of, but those seem like the heavy hitters. Back probing, not supported by the vehicle manufacturers. There's reason for that. It makes sense. There's reason for us to be hesitant with it. First and foremost, depending on where we're doing this, if it's under the hood or under the vehicle, car manufacturers do not like the idea of us back probing because it disturbs or harms, wrecks the weather pack sealing. Any kind of sealing they're doing with a gasket or packing of some sort to protect terminal connections and the connector from the elements, we're potentially damaging that. That's something to keep in mind. I've never let it hold me back. We got to get our signals. And another issue with back probing, not so much what you're going to hear from vehicle manufacturers, but I think from those of us that have been back probing for a while, one of the issues with it is you can fix the problem unwittingly. If you have a connection issue at that connector in that terminal and you shove a needle of some sort, one of my favorites is the acupuncture probes from AES Wave. I'm sure you can go to a department store, a sewing store, pick up a bunch of T-pins. Those work terrifically. You can get varying sizes, length, and diameter for, smaller gauge, if you will, with the smaller gauge wires and etc. Those work. But if you have an intermittent issue, a terminal tension issue that you're chasing, you may actually fix the issue with that needle. As you're pressing it in, it squeezes the terminal. On the flip side, you can also technically create an issue if you're not careful. And even if you are, it's kind of the nature of the beast. As best you can, you have to use some sense and be just aware as best you can with the feedback, if you will. You need a good positive connection, and you got to feel for that without destroying the terminal connection. And while we're talking about connections, that's another issue with back probing is if you're setting up one or more, it doesn't matter how many, honestly, but you're going to go on a test drive and you've back probed these connectors or this connector, and now you're flying along. The issue is acting up and you don't have a very good, solid connection. You could be going down the rabbit hole. You could be making a misdiagnosis because of a bad connection, and the bad connection isn't the actual terminal or connector on the vehicle. It's your back probe is not making a solid connection. Can send you down the rabbit hole. Another issue with the back probing, and you see it more and more with newer vehicles because, let's be honest, wire gauges are smaller. A lot more just signal carrying wires. They don't have to be load bearing. They're not carrying a lot of current. So they're going small gauge. A lot to do with fuel economy, weight. Because of that, the terminals are so small and they can cram so many terminals and connections, if you will, into a small area. A smaller connector that used to maybe only hold 4, 6, 8 terminals total. They can now fit easily 20, 24 in the same amount of space. So using that T-pins or using that acupuncture probe or starting to back probe. And if you're unlucky, as your target is terminal B, and you line up your needle and everything and you start pushing it into B and it makes a left turn or a right turn and ends up in terminal A or terminal C. That's unlucky because you might be getting just the wrong signal. You're expecting whatever on terminal B and you're actually seeing terminal A or terminal C. If you're really unlucky, you short the two together. Short B to A or B to C. It goes in, it does make a connection with terminal B, but makes a left or right turn and now unites the terminal B to terminal A or terminal C. And if you're really, really, really unlucky, those two were never really supposed to be shorted together. And now the shop is buying something because of it. That's not to scare you off of back probing, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind when you are back probing, when you're trying to assess how to access this signal. And if the shop has certain policies, you may want to challenge them a little bit, that there is some major repercussions to back probing. I don't think car manufacturers are all that enthusiastic about it anyways. The second means of accessing a circuit is teeing into the circuit. So unplugging a connector somewhere and using like the AES Wave U test kit, or the Pico has like breakout leads. There's probably other stuff out there, but you know what I mean? We're unplugging a connector and then we're jumping from whatever the female connector to the male or vice versa. And there is some sort of a access to that circuit for our cables, probably like 4mm banana jack, something that will allow us access to that without any sort of probing of the wire or the terminal. We're not disturbing or potentially injuring insulation. Manufacturers are big fans of this. And it's not without its own issues. One, the expense of, depending on how many of these terminals you need. Two, there is a potential when you unplug it to make the wrong connection. Instead of going A to A, you end up going A to B, something of that nature. That might not be good, completely accidental, but it's possible. Also, just the fact of unplugging a connector and plugging it back in may fix the problem. If we have something like terminal fretting, which is a layer of oxidation created by micro-arcing, so not a good positive connection. We have terminal fatigue, poor terminal tension, something of that nature. It starts getting some micro-arcing, and then it creates this layer of oxidation. And unplugging the connector and plugging it back in may temporarily repair it. And temporarily could be years. So that's an issue. Another issue is that we're disturbing the circuit quite a bit. Meaning, what if we have a scenario where wires are rubbed through? Or there's further down another connector that has a bad connection, and now we're really manipulating this harness so we can get our connections with these breakouts, these leads. We may temporarily fix the issue unwittingly. So we're chasing a problem, it's acting up, and now we get our breakout leads in there, and now it's not acting up anymore. Put it all back together, can't get it to act up again, and you're shipping the car NPF, or please bring it back when it acts up. It was acting up when I dropped it off. And not that doesn't happen all by itself anyways, but we're not helping the issue by disturbing the harness with the breakout leads. That's a drawback, and one to be considered. NAPA Autotech training sessions are being conducted day and night in a town near you. This training caters to every level within your organization, be it a mechanical assistant, a mechanical specialist, a technology specialist, or a driver safety calibration specialist. Imagine a one-stop shop training partner in NAPA Autotech that will lead your team to a path to greatness. Autotech's entry-level Build-A-Tech classes convert the untapped potential of your new hires into money-making mechanical specialists. Autotech's higher-level tech update classes introduce specialists to the world of ever-changing technologies, which prevents your shop from getting technologically stagnant. Remember, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. And, turning to the front of the store, the Autotech Service Advisor class is an awesome way to hone your client advocate skill set, ultimately benefiting the customer through an improved vehicle repair experience. But it doesn't stop there. Imagine an electric vehicle class that takes your specialist well past the mundane, yet necessary safety topics. Well, it's here. Autotech's EV Ready Training is a week-long curriculum that takes participants through a hands-on experience involving hybrids and electric vehicles. The session kicks off with the use of PPE and proper tooling while touching on required OSHA regulations. Then, the students dive into the lab vehicles to gain knowledge of the common high-voltage components on EV and hybrid vehicles and their function. Attendees will be taken on a path exposing them to different electric vehicle manufacturers to compare component form and location. Additionally, information about Level 1 and Level 2 charging systems will be included, along with a quick look at DC to DC charging. The operation and maintenance of subsystems are explored, including the different modes of Tesla operations, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Commit to taking your business to the next level with NAPA Autotech training. Also, I kind of skipped over this terminal fretting. The fact of unplugging and plugging back in, of course, could fix it. But also, if you're unplugging it, sticking breakout leads in there, that's further addressing, kind of cleaning, if you will, breaking up that fretting oxidation layer. So you may unwittingly fix the issue that way. Theoretically, you could cause the problem if you're using the wrong terminal sizes. So you're now spreading terminals. So that's something to be very aware of. But yeah, manufacturers are big fans of this. I get it. But there's just reasons we got to be careful when doing so. And then that leaves us with piercing, which we all know I'm in favor of. So I don't really know what else there is to talk about. But I think piercing wires gets a bad rap because there's people that do it very, very poorly. And then probably worse yet is they don't handle it properly. And not even properly. Let's be real. They don't handle it professionally when they're done. The act of piercing the wire, in my mind, and I'm sure I'm biased because I partake. I pierce wires. I live in the Rust Belt. We salt the roads. That's a great way to keep Scotch locks out of our lives, although it just doesn't keep Scotch locks out of our lives. But it definitely helps cause issues with Scotch locks. Yeah, it's one of the ways, if not the primary way, I gain access to signals. And maybe I'm saying this to defend that, but honestly, I feel like the actual piercing of the wire is not the unprofessional part. How we do it and how we handle it when we're done, that's where the professionalism comes in. So I would say the main probes I use for piercing are the Pomonas, the fill probes when they're in stock, and Paul Danner hasn't bought them all up yet. Right, Brian? Those are two favorites. AES Wave has their own that I do, and I use those. They kind of got a wedged area. They're longer than the Pomonas and kind of make it easier to kind of wedge that thing into place and hook the wire and then set the depth. And that's kind of a key with the Pomonas and the AES Wave leads. Now Pico has some piercing probes as well. We can kind of set the depth. We don't have to drive that thing as far in, especially on these small gauge wires. You got to be really careful. There's not a lot of strands there to wreck. So there's some responsibility on just how far we're driving this needle and the probe into the wires. We just need it to make a solid connection. Of course, break through the insulation and of course, get into the strands of wire, but it doesn't have to be tightened all the way. But you can verify that you've made a very positive connection and resistant to disturbance. It's the most consistent way, especially if you're on test drives and all that. If you do this properly, you don't really have to worry about, once my back probe fails, did I get a good connection? Am I right up against that terminal? Is my back probe itself kind of losing contact? This is not an issue with piercing, or shouldn't be. And so, yeah, that's the primary way. When we're done, one of the ways that I think we were taught early on was to use like a clear nail polish or something like that. And the issue with that is they dry hard. So it seals up nice until it doesn't, if that makes sense. You brush that on there and it's sealed. It will be sealed for a while. You just don't know how long, because when it hardens, it can fall out or fall off or just crack around the edges. So the insulation is flexible. The nail polish is not. Over time, it's vibrating. It may not fall away, but it cracks around the hole, if you will, that we've made for piercing, and that allows in moisture, and now we have an issue with corrosion. So that's really not the way anymore. And certainly not, I guess we got to be careful. You can't throw everything under the bus, but RTV, I think in general, was considered a bad idea because it too can just oxidize the heck out of the copper. Unless you know for sure yours doesn't. But I think the best way is to use a liquid electrical tape because it stays flexible. And you just need a little bit to cover up where you made your connection, where you made the piercing. Or piercings, if we're talking about like the Phil's probe, that's kind of got a bed of nails effect kind of going on. That can make a series of smaller punctures. And again, just wipe a little bit of liquid electrical tape on there. Let that dry. It dries still soft and malleable, if you will, or maybe not malleable is probably not the right word, but it remains kind of soft and flexible. That's probably a better word. Soft and flexible. It just lasts. And that's the important part, is how we handle the injury to the wire insulation when we're done. And if we do that, I really feel like piercing ends up being the most reliable way, especially on these really small wires where a bed of nails might be one of the better ways. So the Phil's probe might be one of the better ways to access these really small gauge wires, the bed of nail style, instead of the one, I don't even know if I want to call it a pin, but one piercing probe. When they're brand new, they're really, really sharp. Over time, they start to dull. Piercing probes don't last forever. You need to replace them unless somebody's offering to sharpen them. Might be a business endeavor idea right there. Just kidding. So these don't last forever. They dull. They need to be discarded and replaced with new sharp ones. The really small gauge wires, probably start thinking more on lines of the bed of nail style, where it just makes a series of small holes rather than driving that one relatively large probe, if you will, into the wire. Larger wires, no issue. But again, get yourself some liquid electrical tape and take care of that injury the right way. The manufacturers, they may not like that if you're in a situation, but I think there's a strong argument on a proper way to do it and take care of it after the fact that makes it superior to the other ways. And then if you're in a shop that kind of the protocol is not to pierce, they're anti-piercing, you may have to have a sit down and discuss the caveats of all of them and the benefits of all of them. And I just feel like the piercing will win out. Not sure what else I would add to that other than just be careful. It's not even be careful, just be aware, be present. And when you're making these connections, you're not necessarily driving them in, the probes in as far as they'll go. And unless you have to, and then you're going to take care of it the right way. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have anything to add or disagree with me, feel free to shoot me an email at mattfanslowpodcast@gmail.com. If there's other topics you'd like me to cover or address, again, find me, track me down on social media or fire me that email. You can also save up some questions for December 19th, the one and only Brin Kline. And I didn't make that up. He did. The one and only. Brin, the one and only, will be joining me for a live webinar. Yeah, you can try to stump Brin, and I'll just be there to try to bail him out. Please join us that night, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because that's where Brin is, so the world revolves around him. Yeah, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, December 19th. You can ask us any question you can think of, even if there is such thing as Santa. We'll be happy to answer that. Thank you again for listening. I'd like to thank our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training. Thank you to the Aftermarket Radio Network. And until next time, take care.
You've been listening to Matt Fanslow, diagnosing the aftermarket A to Z on the Aftermarket Radio Network. Follow Matt on your favorite listening app. He's very interested in what you have to say. Let him know what you'd like him to cover and come on the show. Matt is all for advancing the aftermarket. Find Matt Fanslow on social media and connect or on aftermarketradionetwork.com.